So thank you so much for joining us in the next episode of the Entrepreneurial Excellence podcast interview series. I have a super special guest, someone who I have the pleasure of probably calling a friend at this point, even though we've only met once in real life. But someone who I was really lucky enough to get started to know him because I had an opportunity via a friend of mine to invest in his amazing company, Certn. Was able to invest relatively early on and have watched the explosive and amazing growth of Certn and really followed Andrew in what he's been able to do as founder and leader of the company. And it's been so impressive. And there's so much I know I can learn on my own personal entrepreneurial journey from you, Andrew. And so obviously excited to talk about that stuff today, go through all these different things. But before I go deep into that, would love for you to give just a quick overview of maybe yourself, Certn, where you guys are today, and then we'll jump into all of my questions.
Thanks, Adam. First, definitely consider us friends. Really enjoy spending time with you and really appreciate you inviting me here to the podcast. So a little bit about me. I am 36 years old. I live in a place called Victoria, British Columbia, Canada, where most people who are listening to this are like, where is that? And we can get into that at some point. And I'm the co-founder and CEO of Certn, a company that I started with my two best friends at the end of 2016 and now is about just over 400 employees in 13 countries speaking 27 languages, which is super exciting.
It's freaking insane in some ways. I mean, for anybody, I don't know what the actual percentage is, but I bet it's only 1% or maybe 5%, if we're being generous, of companies, startup founders ever reach that point. And I'm sure you would say, or maybe I should ask you, how far along do you yourself in that journey today? Like you would say, okay, you've been doing Certn for almost 7 years. Where are you on that journey? Are you still in phase one, kind of phase two, or you're like, man, we're already hitting it. Man, we could go sell tomorrow and go buy our own private island or something. Where are you in that journey?
I think for me personally, we're not halfway yet. So the exciting part about Certn is that the problem that we're trying to solve, the issue of trust. I mean, people think of us as a background screening company, but the vision is actually way bigger than background screening and pre-employment or tenancy or lending. It's anytime there's trust between people digitally, we want to be a part of that. And so when I look at our journey, we're still very early in the outcome that we want to get to. And I want to build a business that my great-great-grandkids they say, hey, my great-grandfather started that company. This company powered something for us. And so for me, there's a long journey to go. It doesn't mean that, we're not successful and every stage is different. But to me, we're like, I say we're like a 12-year-old. We're like an awkward teenager.
Yep.
So there's still a lot of years left.
And actually, riffing on that for a second, I mean, what you kind of described, and put words in your mouth a little bit, but essentially you described legacy, right? You're talking about building a legacy. Was that, you've essentially been an entrepreneur your whole life, and I want to talk about that a little bit more too, but has legacy been the driving goal for you? Is that why you would say you started Certn, you started your other companies, was because of legacy? And then how do you define legacy? Is it because making something that your grandkids can look up to, or how do you define it?
So I would say in every business prior to this, it was a game of how do you make money? How do you build a business that makes money? How do you build a business that's successful? How do you get that thing? Whatever success looks like to you. And success, when I started my first company, I was 17. Success when you're 17 looks a lot different than success when you're 36. And to be honest, I think the changing point for me was when I have a 3-year-old daughter and a 2-year-old son. And when we had our 3-year-old daughter, I think my view of happiness and my view of success changed from, getting nice cars, surfing more often, whatever that dream was, to hey, a lot of that stuff I can get now. I've been successful enough that I can get the things that I want, and I want very little. I mean, up until 2 weeks ago, I drove a minivan and I was super content. 6 years ago, I ordered a Rivian and it finally came. So now I have a Rivian, which is I have the R1S, which I'm very excited
Amazing
about.
car. Amazing
Yeah,
car.
shameless plug for Rivian.
But you got rid of the minivan. I mean, like the minivans are still so fantastic in so many ways. So that's a big change. I mean, I almost want to ask how you compare the two because they are in some ways so different. But yes, but continue. Sorry.
I mean, the Rivian really is like a minivan that can drive up walls. Like it's just
Freaking insane.
It's insane. Maybe for another podcast, but
Yeah.
But I think the things that I really valued weren't actually that expensive. From like a physical possession thing. Most people that have a decent job could afford the things that I think are really valuable. And it mean a lot to me. And most of the things that mean a lot to me are experiences. I love surfing. I love spending time with my family. I love being outside. It costs nothing to walk out my door and, go for a hike or go mountain biking. I literally, I'm so close to that and so fortunate for that. And it started to make me realize, like, I love the people that I started Certn with. I love the people that work at Certn. What does that success look like when we're solving such a big problem? Like our purpose, like our vision, our mission is so big. Background checks, like, they're not sexy, they're not that exciting.
They're
it's important. A means to where we're trying to go. But yeah, they're important, and it's a means to where we're trying to go, which is kind of an extremely important part of our journey. It solves a big problem for people in the world of talent and tenancy.
Yeah.
And so passionate about that, but like it's the bigger vision. It's the, what does the future look like? What does trust look like? And I think of, Visa and MasterCard. Like, I want to be Visa and MasterCard. I don't want to be some flash in the pan. I want to be the way that people transact in trust.
So, I mean, I love the idea of like solving digital trust, because that is, I mean, this actually goes back. I don't know if you know this. We may have talked about it at some point, but like one of my first companies is called virtue.us, virtuous. And the whole thesis was, how do we deal with digital trust online? And that's actually sort of got lucky enough to invest in some of this stuff in this space. But like, this was really early. This is when like Airbnb was just launching and Uber and in those companies. And no one knew how to trust, right? If you think about it, all the way back then, you're like, wait, I'm going to get in some stranger's car, or I'm going to go sleep in some stranger's house. Like, that is an insane idea. Now, it's super normal nowadays, but it was totally crazy then. And actually, what I just realized when you were describing like solving digital trust is the idea that like, I'm going to need to verify if someone's like real in the next few, like in 5 years. They're probably already today, but like, how do I know you're not an AI? Like, how do I solve for that and have that real layer of trust to know? And maybe I should be able to trust the AI more than a person. I don't know, but like, these are questions I'm sure you guys have thought about a little bit, and it's going to get even crazier as essentially more and more avatars are created for us.
I mean, ChatGPT passed the bar, right? It's a new world of trust, and I mean, whether it's an AI or a human, or whether you are who you say you are, there are millions of transactions every day that happen between parties that don't actually know each other, but need to.
Yeah. Anyway, so obviously totally agree with that. Before we go deeper on that area, like I want to go back to like legacy again still, right? So for you, it sounds like what legacy meant changed, right? So you sort of said, you're like, look, I did this to make money. Like, okay, so walk me back to that 17-year-old Andrew who was like, I want to make money. What was it about your upbringing, your background that was like, you know what, my goal is to make money. And the best way to make money is to go start a crazy company, because that is also insane. I think for most entrepreneurs, it's sort of insane saying, I'm going to go start a company and that's how I'm going to make the most money. Like, a lot of people, frankly, most people, the well-trodden path to make money is you go to college, you get a good job with some big company out of college, you slowly move up the ranks as much as you can. And it doesn't happen quite as much anymore because companies are crazy, but that's the sort of path. Why did 17-year-old Andrew say, F it, that is not my direction, I'm going to go start a company instead? Like, did you have help from your parents to like afford the ability to go do that? Did you not? And you're like, I just want to make way more money faster than I'm ever going to make getting paid a salary somewhere. Like, what was the thinking?
So, I mean, as 17-year-old me, it was trying to figure out what my place was in the world and how I wanted to be. And interestingly enough, I really loved snowboarding and really wanted to be a professional snowboarder, and that was never going to happen. But I wanted to be able to snowboard a lot, and you couldn't exactly do that with a full-time job. And, being a snowboard coach or snowboard instructor was not exactly the dream job. And I kind of had this interesting childhood, which was like very boring and normal. But my dad worked for the Royal Bank of Canada basically his entire career.
Yeah.
You know, up until somewhat recently, had been, you know, in one iteration or another of the same company for 30 years.
So just sort of like slowly moving
And
up the ranks, probably like changing career, getting more
yeah,
promoted here
yeah,
and there, slightly more money, maybe getting a good pension or something at some point.
yeah, very, very stable, very consistent. You
Yeah.
know, that that was his career trajectory, and and he did and has done extremely well. My grandfather, on the other hand, was the first person to graduate from high school in his family.
Wow.
He was the
Wow.
first
Not just
person,
college, high school.
high school. He was the first person to graduate from college in his town, and he was able to in later in his career start businesses and do quite well. And I sort of looked at my dad's view of at the time. This is very much at the time. You know, when I was 17, my dad's view was, you know, there's really three professions: doctor, lawyer, and accountant. And my everyone in my family is a doctor, lawyer, or an accountant for the most part.
Yep.
And and everyone else is a drug dealer. For the record, I have never dealt drugs, but it was like, you know, those were the ways
I mean,
to get
I'd
successful.
probably get in trouble saying this, but like drug dealing is an entrepreneurial profession. So
It is.
it's a dangerous profession, but it is entrepreneurial.
I was just never that good with numbers, you know, the if you've ever watched me do art, it's just, you know, it's measuring and cutting are not my skills.
So then, okay, so you're like, okay, this is your dad's view of the world. You were like, I want to go find more time to snowboard. And you're 17 years old, like you haven't even gone to college yet, or maybe you're about to start college. Like, why start a business? Was it to be like, Dad, I disagree with you, to prove your dad otherwise? Like, I don't know.
It was actually a really close family friend who is an entrepreneur taught me a really valuable lesson, and that was, you know, I was mowing his lawn, and he came to me and said, "Hey, you know, you're making whatever $25 an hour mowing this lawn. You know, you can pay somebody 10 and keep 15 for yourself. And instead of just doing my lawn, you could be doing 10 lawns or 20 lawns or 30 lawns at the same time." And I'm like,
Mind
doing the
blown.
math in my head, and I'm like, so you're telling me that I can pay some sucker $10 an hour to mow this lawn when I can be, you know, convincing other people to get their lawns mowed? Because that was my gift, you know, like at a at a at a young age, I figured out that I could get on stage or I could get in front of a group of people and convince them to do something they probably shouldn't do. Now, I've got good morals, and I hate losing, so maybe that's part of it. But
Yeah.
you know, I was 16, and in a high school cafeteria, I raised $10,000 for just standing on stage for cancer, convincing people to shave their heads.
Wow.
And I mean, I ended up shaving one of my eyebrows. And you know, this is like high school kids. Like, where do you get $10,000 in a high school cafeteria? You know, like this is like,
Wow.
you know, people digging out change, you know, teachers
Yeah.
writing checks, parents ended up coming in. And I was like, my gift is convincing people that their lawns should be mowed by me and a group of my friends that have,
Totally
like,
insane.
you know, no idea about mowing lawns other than their parents' lawn. I mean, kind of got a little funny where I would convince people to pay me for their kids to mow their lawn, which was, you know, you know, a bit of a Ponzi lawn mowing scheme. But at 17, that was totally cool. And then I stumbled across tech, and it was like, you mean I can build something that I don't have to pay those people to do that thing? And you know, this whole concept of like gross margin came into play, and it was like, you know, okay, so now I should, this is kind of my path. And I didn't study computer science. I'm not a computer scientist, and I'm
Yeah.
probably the worst programmer like ever. But when I ended up selling my little landscaping business, and when I went to university or college, I I stumbled across a problem, and that was that people were having a really hard time selling textbooks to each other.
Hmm.
So, you'd have the same textbook, and people would be buying new textbooks, and you'd find like piles of old textbooks that people who graduated just like couldn't sell. And I was like, well, how do you sell these? And it's like, well, you put them on eBay,
Yeah.
and you got to ship them, and you got to go through this whole process. And this is like, relatively early days of eBay. And I'm like, well, what if I just created a place where you could sell stuff to people on campus, so like a local eBay,
Yeah.
where you didn't have to deal with like shipping or anything like that. And yeah, I mean, that was awesome. I didn't figure out how you get paid for that, but someone eventually bought it. And if I had kept going, it could have been great. But I guess I was 19 at the time to get a 6-figure check as a 19-year-old that was, on student loans. And then all of a sudden you don't, like, college is paid for. I bought the biggest house in the small town of, like, where I went to school. It's a very different, like, the biggest house in this small town was like 200,000 Canadian dollars. So, like, what's $50 US right now?
Still, I mean, like, that's a huge. I mean, the fact that once again you're able to pull this off, and you're like, I'm just trying to solve a problem that you saw, and it sounds like though the underlying goal was still like, hey, look, I think I can make money doing this. Yes, it's solving a problem. Like, there's obviously a need for it, but still solve that problem. What do you think gave you the drive? Obviously you're different than a lot of other people. And obviously I mean that in a good way, but I think entrepreneurs are all a little bit insane too. But like, you're different than other people. What made you see this problem? What made you think, okay, I see this problem for textbooks, which had existed for a long time. I see this problem. I'm going to go solve that, when others didn't decide to go do that. Like, what is that spark that Andrew has?
I mean, one is that I really like to solve problems. Most people talk about the problems that they have, but never want to go solve them. I think, like, one of maybe my best business characteristic and my worst relationship characteristic is that I want to solve all of the problems.
I'm sure your wife really appreciates that.
Oh, yeah. She loves it. She's like, I can't come to you with any problems because you just want to solve them, and I just want to talk about them. And it's I'm learning. We've been married for 10 years. I'm still trying to figure it out, but I'm getting better at it.
Yep.
But for me, it was like, like, why does this problem exist? How do we solve this problem? At the time, I wasn't necessarily smart enough to figure out how do you monetize that problem, but no one had monetized it yet. Craigslist didn't exist. It was, eBay did, and they had figured out how to monetize it. But that's a story for a beer someday of how I totally messed up payments.
But eBay had to buy PayPal to get it right. I mean, it's not like they figured it out.
Exactly. So that was why. I mean, I had to solve it, and I became obsessed with it. Like, it's I don't know if it's like ADHD. My stepmom's a teacher, and she always tells me that I have ADHD, but I've never been diagnosed because I manage it somehow. But I would just obsess over this problem, and then figure out a way to solve that problem, and just go for it. And I've always been a risk taker. As a kid, it was like, oh, there's a huge jump, like, there's a 70-foot like boot or snowboard jump. It's like, okay, who's gonna hit it first? And I was always the dumb one who's like,
sign me up. I'm jumping off.
Yeah. I only had like 7 or 8 concussions by the time I was 17. So it didn't really work out so well. Yeah, I didn't land them all the time. Or at least I didn't land on my feet all the time. I always landed just, sometimes on my head.
But isn't that like almost a truism to say that, like, if you're not trying, you're not going to learn, and like that you probably became a better snowboarder because you were trying those things. You, I'm sure, have become a better entrepreneur because you tried all those things, and not all of those things worked out, right? So I mean, like, you still have to have. Is it just a less fear, you think, than most people?
I think it's kind of it's coupled a little bit. There's less fear, but also acknowledgement of the risks. What is the risk, and how do you calculate it? For me, when I look at investing in other entrepreneurs, or I look at companies that are going to be successful, I actually don't look at the track record of success for the entrepreneur. I look at how they've learned from their failures. What did you take out of that company that didn't do so well? Because I know that if you failed at one company and you're willing to do it again, that you've got that edge. You don't have fear.
Yep.
But if you've learned from it, I mean, that next company I found is always exponentially better because you figured out how to do it. So, I mean, for me in my journey, it was like, you get the 6-figure exit, then you get the 7-figure exit, then you get the 8-figure exit. Now I want a number that's got more than that.
Yep.
So
I do too. As an investor, I'm ready.
Yeah.
But although that's a different discussion about being an investor, because I think we just got to go along for the ride and let the entrepreneurs do the really hard work. But actually, so this is a really good segue. Walk us more through. Okay, so great. So you're 17, started this business for sort of book exchange in college. Then is that when that wasn't Rent Moolah, right? That was, you went to Rent Moolah after college or after university, right?
I did a whole bunch of different other companies, most of which never really get talked about. And actually kind of felt like my path was helping other people start companies. So by the time I had graduated from university, I had started and sold a company, and I had started and then eventually sold another company. And then I was kind of lost. So when I left I had sold my other company, which was, I was really into tech, and then I went back into physical goods for a little bit. So we did distribution of like clothing, apparel, and goods, and we streamlined the logistics, and we sold things better than anyone else. We brought some really great brands to Canada. It was a really cool business, but like, you had physical inventory, you had a lot of the things that you hate about tech but like love about tech. Nothing breaks for reasons that you don't know, because there's like a period somewhere there shouldn't be. But you're carrying a lot of physical inventory, so you've got cash flow management challenges, and then you've got like staffing headcount challenges, and there's ups and downs. There's no it's not a reoccurring subscription thing. And so I had the good fortune to be able to exit that, and thought my passion is helping other entrepreneurs with their entrepreneurial journey. And I had saved up enough cash to do a little vacation. So I moved to Australia and did a master's in what I call surfing and beer, but it was actually international business and law. It was like the best, like, for entrepreneurs out there, like, if you ever get a chance, just like go do an MBA somewhere awesome.
Yeah.
Just like as a mental break. Because school is very easy relative to the shit you deal with on a daily basis.
Oh yeah. School's like very prescribed. You know what to do. You know what you need to do to get your grades. And like, yeah, I mean, in being an entrepreneur, it's like there's something new every day. Like I'm sometimes scared. I'm like, what's going to be in my Slack server? I'm like, what's going to be on my Slack once we're done with this call? And I'm like, I don't know. We're going to find out.
Yeah, I mean, you're in law school, and most other people are like, wow, this is new, and I'm like, oh yeah, no, I've been part of trademarking something, or like I've received a cease and desist letter before. Like, I know what all of this I've incorporated. You've done all this stuff, so it becomes more practical. So it almost becomes, I mean, I found it like, it was almost too easy, and then they kind of mold you to like go a certain direction. So in my master's, it was like, you work for Bain, BCG, McKinsey, you work in like strategy consulting. So like, I came out of there with this mindset of like, okay, I'm going to work in strategy consulting.
Of course.
But at the same time, like, I can never have a job, so I'm just going to do this myself. Like, I'm going to be a consultant. And so I had a good group of clients that took me to Asia, to Central America. I managed to do some really cool things, and then decided in, I guess it was 2013, a guy that I had played rugby with in college called me and said, hey, there's these two guys that have this idea. You're a landlord, you've experienced this. They really need to get this off the ground, and they're looking for someone to join them in this. The company didn't have anything at the time. And I'm like, well, what's the company? It's like, well, and in Canada, back, people might forget this, but like, in North America back in like 2013, rent was only paid by check. Like there was no
There's nothing electronic.
online payment method.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's nothing electronic. And having lived in Australia, I'd lived in Costa Rica, I'd lived in Asia, like part of my language, like where the F do you get a check when you live in a different country? Like living in the States, like, yeah, I can pay for stuff with my Visa, but then like I go to pay rent and it's like, how the F do I pay my rent? Like, it's like, well, you got to get a check and you got to go to a bank account. Anyway, that means you're homeless for a period of time while you're trying to get banking set up. And there's like no Airbnb, there's no VRBO, like short-term rental options. When I lived in New York was like hotel.
Yeah.
And so you're staying in a hotel. And so I was like, boom, like mind blown. Like if you could pay your rent with a credit card, you would not only make it easier for people, credit or debit or, any kind of electronic payment method, you could open up the opportunity as a landlord for better quality tenants. Cause you think like expats, highly qualified people from overseas. You can also probably get more money for said apartment, and you can streamline things. Like you're not having to go deposit checks or take pictures of checks. Like it's all integrated in your accounting system. Like, guys, this is brilliant. So we started that. We kicked things off in 2013 there, and managed to grow the company to about 40 million.
Wow.
When myself and my two best friends left Rentmoola to start Certn.
And so that's crazy though. I also want to ask more questions about that, but like, how did the world wasn't ready for credit cards in some ways, but okay, so it worked well. You built all that stuff. I don't want to go too far down the Rentmoola side. But wait, did you go from Rentmoola to, I'm going to pronounce it wrong again, even though you told me, is it Emei?
Oh, Emei was my side hustle.
Okay.
I really wanted a Yeti cooler, and
but you could afford a Yeti. You made this money from the other companies, right? So you could afford a Yeti cooler.
Well, being able to afford a Yeti cooler and being able to justify spending $500 on a cooler are two very different things.
I love that. Okay, got it.
We talked about it before the show here. I still fly economy everywhere because I can't justify like a business class or a first class ticket. So, for me, it was like spending $500 on a cooler. I was like, there is no way when I can like make my own cooler. I'd worked in distribution. I'd worked with a bunch of brands. I had experience in manufacturing. And so to make a cooler was relatively easy. The other thing I'd experience in was patent and trademark law. Yeah. So thanks to my educational history, it was like, okay, what did Yeti have patented that I could not do or purposely do something that's different enough that we couldn't be caught in the same trap. And so we found, myself and one of my close friends, we found a factory, we got molds made and we made these coolers, and we ended up selling just tons and tons of coolers. And this was like the very beginning days of Certn. And I'm sure many of the listeners here will have been in the situation of like the beginning days where it's like, you've got your idea, you've got your product roadmap, you just don't have that product yet. And you can only sell so many people. And it's Certn, like we had sold probably too many people on our services before they were actually built and proven. Those customers are all still customers today, which Amazing. I'm really proud of. But we'd probably, we had oversold just a little bit. So I had a little bit of extra time and was like, had to figure out how to, how to get a cooler because we were, bootstrapping. It wasn't like I had a paycheck. So yeah, started that company. And then in 2021, someone had offered to buy it. And it was during the pandemic when we got the offer. And it was when getting containers from China was like insanely expensive. It went from like, to get a container of coolers here, it went from, $1,700 to, I think at the peak, it was like $22,000.
Insane, of course.
And so I was like, when they made us an offer, I was like, this is great.
What made you decide though, even to keep that as a side hustle, right? So obviously during that time period, Certn starts to take off, starts to do well. You're splitting your time now between different things. How do you as an entrepreneur decide like what do you tell people on your team even, right? You might have team members who have side hustles, things like that. Like, how do you say like what to focus on, what not to focus on? Like, what's your main job? How do you do one job really well and another one also well? How does that work?
So I would say it's different for everybody, but for me it was I had specific time blocked off for that
Mhm.
business, and I had committed mentally like, hey, this is 5 hours a week, and I had no kids and lots of time. So to me that was the hours where my team wasn't working. So usually like 5, 6, 7 a.m. for an hour, I would work on it, and then I found somebody that could run the business that I really trusted. That was I could be a board member as opposed, and no discredit to board members, but like you're not there on the day to day. You're reviewing financials on a monthly basis. You're tracking progress. You're coming up with cool ideas for how we could grow this business. And I found the most amazing person. Well, it was a friend that I had had for a long time, and he expressed some interest, and he was at Arc'teryx. So for those of you that don't know Arc'teryx, like the
Great,
most
great product.
badass
Yeah, I'm
outerwear,
still too
great
cheap
product.
to buy Arc'teryx because it's
Yeah,
like, dude,
yeah.
I buy all my outer gear, like what I'm wearing right now. Like, it's nice stuff, but it's on sale and everything else because I'm still too cheap for that. And Arc'teryx is like the best of the best.
Well, I think I mean this is probably a sad story in a couple different ways, because he came on, he did amazing things, um, and I mean I knew he was an amazing guy, and he did so well that I'm like, we need you at Certn. Like, I need you at Certn. He was living in Vancouver, and we had moved to Victoria, and I'm like, I need you in Victoria. I need you at Certn. We got to get rid of this. We got to get rid of this bag and cooler company. It's awesome. It's fun. It covers our surf trips, but like, and we were surf buddies. And I'm like, but I need you at Certn. And at that point, I was like, we got to get rid of this thing. Like, it doesn't really matter how much money we make off of it, but like, I need you here at Certn. And so he ended up joining Certn, and at that point it was like, okay, and Certn was like now a real thing.
Yeah.
And it was like, okay, we gotta just do Certn. And so yeah, we ended up, I mean, it was kind of out of left field, and in the timing that like someone came and made an offer. Taylor was moving over to the island and joining Certn, and yeah, I mean, that's the only downside, is you find someone really great, and all of a sudden the thing that's becoming more successful, you need to bring that great person into, like, you know. And so
You got
yeah, he runs operations here
you got
now.
to make the tough decisions. I mean, that's part of it in any role, certainly, but certainly as a founder. So then, okay, so this is like kind of a perfect segue. Like, why build Certn, right? So you had basically done to review it, right? You did books, you did rent, basically like electronifying rent. You did coolers, and then you decided to go do a background check company, which is one totally different. But then of course there's also a ton of competition in that space, or a bunch of other companies that were already pretty big. What made you have any confidence that you could build anything different there that was of any value to anyone?
So at Rentmula, we had an opportunity to exit, which was cool. So there was a buyer that was lined up, and there was kind of a good time to transition, and it was the summertime, and I'm thinking, okay, what is the future? Like, what is the problem that I have that I really want to solve? And in looking back in my experience, there's kind of two things. The first thing is, like, I wanted to work with people that I loved spending time with, and that like I thoroughly enjoyed. And Owen and Evan, my two best friends, we had been working together there for a few years. So I knew we had to do that. And so the three of us, we went on a little surf trip. I mean, the poor guys, like, they don't really surf. I don't even think they enjoy surfing, but like they would like placate me and go on these like long road trips, like basically, well, like, while I surfed and they were cold. And we're like, what do we do? Like, what is the challenge?
Yeah.
And there's a lot of stuff that tied together. So the the kind of the thing that bonded us, and was like a common problem that we heard, is that like everyone had issues with getting access to opportunity for some reason or another. At Rentmula, it was like when we did background checks on people first for SOC 2 or ISO or for PCI compliance, it was taking weeks. When we and the candidate experience was terrible. You're trying to hire someone, and then all of a sudden they get like this 10-page document that takes them forever to fill out, and it's it's uncomfortable. We're like, okay, that part sucks. And then imagine you're trying to do it overseas. So like when I moved to New York, we expanded Rent Mula into the States, and so I moved to New York. Like I couldn't get a place to rent. It was really challenging. I had no credit. I had no job history. I was like, well, what do I do? And we thought, okay, there's got to be a way where we can empower individuals through trust towards opportunity. So when you go from, Canada to the US, like I can see like out my window right now, like I am looking at the Olympic Peninsula, like I am looking at the United States. Yet when I cross that border, I may be able to pay cash for an apartment. I couldn't rent it.
Which is of course insane. I mean, it's like insane that we're obviously so close, our systems are so similar, and yet you couldn't do that. Like that is crazy.
So that's where we're like, imagine a world where an individual could hold their credentials. You could hold your degrees, you could hold your work history, you could hold your credit in whatever countries you've got credit in so that you can monitor them. You can hold your criminal history, so in real time, you can know, and anyone you would like to know can know that you're not a criminal. And we're like, okay, this is it. Like this trust problem is massive. So we decided, okay, this is what we're going to do. And then kind of like all the other things, the three of us just ended up obsessing over it. Like think of all the different use cases. Like, think of transactions online, like, when you're buying and selling stuff on Facebook. Think about like Tinder or,
everything. How do you try?
Grindr, Farm Friends, JDate, like how do you trust people in that way? Think of, tenancy was an immediate one that we were like, okay, we know every landlord, in North America, like how do we kick this off here? And, lending and financial services, like, same thing. How do they get, more access to people that might have thin files in a domestic country? How do you get that neurosurgeon that's driving an Uber in San Francisco to do the thing that is more impactful to society? Because in the country that they came from, the quality of education might be just as good or close. Like there's got to be something that, I rely on Uber for my daily life. So, no disrespect there, but like, I would much rather that person be the doctor that I need, as opposed to my Uber driver. So that was like the thing that we were hell bent on doing. And we just obsessed over it until the point where like, we got to just go do this. And that's how it started.
And so then you're like, okay, we got to go do this. We think this is unsolved. Like there's all these problems that obviously still exist. Did you guys then self-fund it? Like what did you do? How did you start building a product in the space to go get this off the ground and actually convince people to go buy it from three people who have no idea about how to build trusts in a sense?
So it kind of goes back to failing. You just fail a whole bunch of times. You just fail really fast. And so the funny thing is like the idea that we came up with in the beginning, it was like, it's where we want to go, but the world wasn't ready for it.
Yeah.
When you start talking about like, blockchain for identity in 2016, people are like, yeah, like crypto wasn't even cool then. Like there was like, it was like, no, like that's a farce. Like that's currency. That's never going to be big. Obviously that changes. You start talking about giving consumers their own information. It's like, that's great, but like, how do you get the consumers? You're going to have to spend millions. And we're like, okay, you're right. Like this is really a three-sided marketplace where you've got like issuers of credentials, think like universities, colleges, state courts, law enforcement, departments of motor vehicles. So you've got those issuers, and then you've got the businesses that rely on those credentials from the consumer. Mm-hmm. So you've got three different parties. And we looked at it and we're like, okay, what is the best way to tackle this problem? As we like went into all these businesses and they were like, yeah, well, you have no consumers. So like, what's the value to us? We're like, well, what if we can just do background checks better, faster, and cheaper? And they're like, yeah, we'd pay for that. And we're like, okay, great. So that's what we're going to do. Like, that's the first step, is like build that build that brand trust with businesses.
Yeah.
So when people see that Certn logo, they're like, okay, I know the thing that's contained in this report or the information that's being shared by Certn is true and correct and comes from the source of truth. And at the same time, the sources of truth are like, okay, this company is secure. We can share information with them. They're getting the right consents from candidates, and they are a legitimate business. And so we built those two sides of the marketplace. And then now what we're doing is we're giving people access to their credentials. So there's going to be some exciting things that happen in the new year where people are going to be able to access pretty much all of their credentials to enable them access to opportunity. And that to me is like, when you get critical scale, critical mass there, it's like,
Yeah,
you open up
essentially
so
what you're
much
saying
opportunity.
is, unlike all the companies that sort of have different parts of your identity today and like in a sense are making money off of that identity, you kind of control your own identity and you can take it with you to transact, I assume, in other places.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good. Same idea that we had with Virtue a long time ago was sort of the same idea. And it has taken a long time, but hopefully that time is now where this is really an opportunity. But so keep like, okay, so fine. Like you guys say, hey, we're going to do better, faster background checks. Like, but like that, even that, I mean, like there's a million businesses out there today that you get pitched businesses, I'm sure, that say the same thing. We're going to do this better. What made you actually able to do it better compared to, once again, all the other startups that you probably talked to that are like, we're going to do it better, but yet they fail? Like why was background checks either ripe opportunity, or what did you guys do as entrepreneurs to make it into this opportunity that now, the business you built?
I would say it's kind of twofold. When it comes to background checks are not sexy. So there was not a lot of competition in the space at the time, especially in markets outside the US.
Yeah.
Like on average globally, we compete with 3 other companies. In the US, there's probably 1,500, and they've all taken a different spin on how to do background checks, but it all comes from the same traditional way of doing background screening. Like, Checker said, okay, we're going to do background checks the same way as everybody else, but we're going to put an API around it.
Yep.
And it, like, coming from tech and spending, like most of my career, most of the last 17 years in tech, it's like, what doesn't have an API? You build the API first, and then you build everything around that.
But to their credit, right? They did. No one had thought to put an API around background checks at the time.
No, and kudos to them for doing that. And I mean, Checker is a really great business. I've got a lot of respect for what Checker's done. They did a good job in the US by wrapping an API around that. Where what I found is what we found, and kind of back to our original thesis, is like Checker's fine if you want to do a background check on someone in the US for a job in the US. Sterling, First Advantage, HireRight are fine.
Yep.
If you want to do a background check on somebody who is born and raised in the US. But I mean, if you look at the jobs these days, if you look at the population, like the number of people that are born and raised in the place that they are in currently is really small. I mean, if you were to do a background check on me when I started Certn, like you'd have to do a background check on me in 8 countries where I had visas or had residency for a period of time. And it's like, that would just be like pre-Certn. It would be like,
It would break
way.
the system. And then what it would actually mean, I
Yeah.
assume, is for people like you, if a company needed to do a background check and wanted to hire this amazing person, Andrew, they might not do it because they couldn't verify a lot of your information. If you're like, hey, I worked in all these places, they're like, we can't do our background check, it won't work, therefore we can't hire you,
Yeah.
which is crazy.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's kind of a bit of the differentiator. And we came from a place of like, we wanted consumers to have control. So like, even if they didn't think they had control, like on the front end, behind the scenes, like we had always associated all of the facets of identity and credentials with an individual. So we built it in a way that was consumer centric first, even if like on the outside it's like, no, this is a background screening company. The core infrastructure was like consumer first. So when we make that pivot and we start looking at this type of stuff, it gives us a lot more flexibility, and it also means the candidate experience of giving consent is a lot better. So you're not having to fill out 15 pages of information that we can pull with like a simple API call or off the back of your driver's license. It's like, take a picture of the front and back of your driver's license, a selfie, consent 3 times, you're done. Like connect your LinkedIn profile. Like all this stuff is like
Mhm.
very, very easy to do,
Yep.
where traditional screening companies were like, oh, we need this like big form that you need to fill out. And I was like, no, you don't. You need, there's consents and disclosures that, that the regulators require, but like really the information we need is really basic. So
Yeah.
let's make that super easy.
So you get this going. Um, do you think your wedge, just to maybe be really specific, do you think your wedge was the fact that you guys were not in the US? Like, had you been in the US, you either might not have identified the issue in the first place, or it just was so competitive in the US it wouldn't have made sense. Whereas your wedge was almost like, because you guys didn't start with doing US background checks, you were doing them in Canada. Like we're going to go solve this in Canada where it clearly is still broken.
Exactly. I mean, our wedge was really, oh, we can do this better in Canada. And then we looked at the world and said, the rest of the world is very different than the US when it comes to background checks, much less mature and also much more centralized in terms of data. So we looked at the global background screening landscape or the global credential landscape, and we're like, okay, well, we can get proprietary access in a whole bunch of these countries, where in the US it's all public information. For the most part, everything's public. Like you can go to the California courts and get your
Yep.
criminal history.
Yep.
And so we thought, okay, we can replicate our model in Canada internationally, and we kind of got our status in Canada somewhat by accident, in the sense that, like, we met the right person, the right bar at the right time, and we're able to get proprietary access to information that others weren't, through legitimate means, but like that most people didn't know you could do.
But
And that's where
actually
it started.
on that note, to kind of interrupt you there, like one of the theses that I sort of have around being a great entrepreneur is people call it luck, but it's really not luck. Like you put yourself in that bar in the right time and right place with the right questions in hand to identify whoever that person was. So was it lucky? Sure, but you were also there with all the right things in your head already to use that luck in your favor, to make that luck become real luck in your favor, right? I mean, like, do you agree with that? How did that?
To-
Yeah.
Totally. Well, I mean, my philosophy in life and in business is like, I'm a surfer. I'm in control of two things: timing and direction. I can go left or right, and I have to choose when to stand up. I don't get to control the waves. Like,
Yeah.
I have to be ready. I don't get to control the waves. I can sit in the water. I can sit in the lake and yell as loud as I want. I can stomp my feet. I can splash around. That lake is never going to deliver me a surfable. Well, most lakes will never
Yes.
deliver me a surfable wave. And so in that sense, are the best surfers in the world lucky? I mean, Kelly Slater managed to win a world title, what, 12 times? Like, that's not luck.
No,
That's
but I guess your point. He wouldn't have won those world titles if he was sitting in a lake waiting for a wave.
exactly,
Happened.
exactly.
So is that an analogy in some ways for like life? I mean, how do you actually? I mean, this riffing on that a little bit. Like, what do you tell your team? Right? Like, you have 400 employees. Like, how do you explain that to your team and be like, look, you can jump on this and take this ride the way you want it, or just do your one little job and maybe that's okay too. Like, how do you help the team think through that sort of analogy, or is that an analogy you want to push with the team? Like, maybe, I don't know, do you want everyone in the company to be a surfer, or do you want some of them to be like the lifeguards, and what do you care about?
So I think in that analogy, the team is actually the wave. So
Mm,
like when you talk about creating change, when you talk about um, when you talk about this analogy, it's kind of, there's a whole bunch of different dimensions to it, because you know I'm the surfer in my situation, and most people are the surfer in theirs, but they also have to be there to create change. So me on my own, like I can get on our company all hands and be like, okay, everybody, we're going left today, and nobody's gonna go left, like
totally.
it's like, well, that was great. That was a really great speech.
Yep.
You have to get everybody on board to create that wave. Like, you have to show the why. Like, you have to be able to capitalize as a leader on the opportunity. And everyone's their own surfer, but together we can create a wave. It's that first person on a dance floor, at a wedding. Like, there's
Yep.
no one there, but that first person decided that they're going to go sit out in the lineup. They're going to be that surfer. They're going to go and they're going to dance. And then, everybody ends up piling on. And that's where you create the wave. So in my mind, the team's the wave. Like the team is the thing that creates the power. It creates the outcome that we want. I have to choose the timing and the direction. And if I can choose that right, then that wave can be incredible, or it can just crush you.
Yeah, no, it's in a sense a great analogy. I mean, so then how do you make sure as a founder, and maybe it changes at every different stage, but like it sounds like great entrepreneurs, and I view you as one of those, create that wave. What are the things you do to create that wave? Like, how do you still have to, and it maybe keep using that analogy before we break it, but like you need to choose the right body of water for that wave to be in the first place. So that could mean the right team, the right product, the right marketing and sales. What are those elements that you need to have? Let's say as an early stage company, when you were first early days at Checker, and maybe then all the way up to today, I don't know if those things have changed, but like what are the elements you're like, these need to be in place to make a wave even possible?
They differ at each stage. And I would say that in the stage that Certn's at right now, I'm still learning what creates that. And that's a bit of a discovery as you get to 400 people across all these different time zones. We talked about it before the show about I was not about company offsites, and now I'm like pushing to do company offsites. The people that you have at the beginning are people that thrive in chaos and ambiguity. Yeah. Like they are people that are just going to get shit done, and they don't need to be told, and they don't need to be managed, and you don't need to worry about engagement, because their engagement is the impact that they're having on the company. Mm-hmm. And that's like, that to me is sort of the up to toddler phase of the business. I use this analogy because I've got a 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, and it's like, for them, like, they don't care where they are. They can have the best time in the world. Like, the presents that you get them don't matter, because they just want to rip up the paper. Yeah. like they are like content with the situation and solving the problem. Then you get to a later stage where it's like, okay, we kind of need some more structure. We need some more process. We can't have 50 different languages in our code because, Rust is cool today. So like, let's throw that in there for this thing. And, microservices worked for other companies. We should have microservices. Yep. We're only, you have 10 engineers, and all 10 engineers have a separate microservice they're working on, and they don't document anything. Like, that becomes chaos. And so you've got the next phase of people that are trying to build process. And like, I want to get to a stage at Certn where it's like minimum viable bureaucracy, but you have to go like, you have to overreach those guardrails a little bit first. And so that kind of like next stage of growth. And there's some people that go from like, that can't go from the toddler stage to sort of the like, I don't know, kid into the teen stage. Yeah. And you've got to have the right people for the right time. And you've got to make sure that it's okay for those people that are in the toddler stage to not be part of the company anymore, to be like strong alumni, but maybe they're not the right people for the time. A lot of those people will figure out the kid stage. And then, right now I joke that we're sort of in the tween stage. We're growing really fast still, but like, we're lanky, we're uncomfortable, we've got braces, we've still got a curfew. Yep. We think we can drive, but like, we can't really, there's no stopping us. Like, like we're going head first into everything. Just, we don't necessarily have the coordination we need. And that to me is like the next phase of our evolution. So when you're talking about creating that wave, it's a new way of creating that wave for the team that I'm trying to perfect. And I'll get back to you when I've figured it out, and I'll obsess about it until then.
And I mean, and so first of all, I definitely want to keep understanding like how you keep doing that, because it's always something new. It seems for every entrepreneur when you think through it. But like, and I would love, maybe if we have time, maybe we might not, but like, I would love to keep talking about minimum viable bureaucracy, because that's another thing that I also want to do. We're actually having debates internally at Levy, my company. You know, how many, what does it mean to be a manager, not be a manager? How many people do they manage? What does that look like? How much bureaucracy does that create? Those sorts of questions. And I know that's going to change over time, and people get uncomfortable when we're changing things up. And I'm like, well, that's just part of the joy, I think, of a company, but yet it can be really uncomfortable for people. So do you think then, is it, when you think back to the earlier days, was it about hiring the right people and the right mentality? Was it about the fact that Certn's product was just badass and amazing and perfect for the Canadian market? Like, or was it the fact that you could tell a fantastic story and not only recruit the right people, but of course convince these companies to use your early off the shelf product that has a ton of probably broken things in the back end that they don't even know about?
It's all of them.
Yeah.
Because when you have to have the conviction to be able to move forward. So like, as a founder, you have to be able to tell the story that gets people to buy in, because the reality is like, very few companies at that stage actually have, they don't have anything perfect. They never do. Like, I mean, everything is effed all the time, and the team has to be okay with the fact that things are effed, and like, it's gotta grow, and it's gotta improve. But like, if you want to like bootstrap a business, or you want to like survive, you want to go through the venture process, like, you need to grow. And sometimes to grow, you have to do things that are unscalable, knowing the path to making them scalable. And so I think it's having the right people that are at that early stage that are like okay with that kind of chaos. Like, you can't have perfectionists. Like, you have to have people that are focused on, outcomes over perfection.
Mm-hmm.
And you've got to be able to tell that story. And at the same time, like, finding product market fit is like, is in my mind, none of that happens unless you've had conversations with customers, you've obsessed over the customer's problems, and you've had those real conversations with customers to say like, would you buy this? Sign this so that when we're live, you will buy it.
So how much time did you spend early on, maybe even today, doing like founder-led sales, number one, and then sort of number two, related to that, also founder-led recruiting, right? Like, how much time I don't know why the balloons just started popping up on the screen. That was the weirdest thing ever. I think it was like, I think there's some like AI thing that says like, if I do some hand signals or something, that was crazy. I want to do that again. Did that work?
Yeah.
I don't know. Anyways, that was very odd. It was so excited by the AI was so excited by my question. But I mean, like, how much was it founder-led sales to continue to learn, and then also founder-led recruiting, right? Like, and what were the qualifications for both of those you were looking for? Like, when you're talking to potential employees, were there certain things you look for to see like, hey, you can thrive in the chaos? And with customers, you're going to thrive in the fact that we're not perfect, but we're going to scrappy and get you the right answer.
Yeah, I mean, founder-led sales, I don't think ever really end. It's just a portion of your day that is founder-led sales. I mean, for us, I would say it was up until our Series A that it was all founder. So like, myself and Evan, my co-founder, like, it was our show. It was all founder-led sales, and those founder-led sales became product. Like, that influenced where our product went, because we were talking to the customers. We were with them every day. And Series A is like really where you find product market fit, and then you have to scale it and prove that, like,
that's the idea of Series A almost. It's like pour fuel on the fire that's like already burning decently, and like make it a massive flame.
And it's also the time where you stop doing founder-led recruitment, which I think is it's actually probably the wrong approach. Like, I would say that we should have done founder-led recruitment for longer. And I also think, kind of for advice for people that are growing at that rate, especially like growing headcount at that rate, being involved and being intentional is really important to looking for those qualities. Because I found, in reflection for me, I didn't do a good enough job of calling out the behaviors that I wanted to see. What was the commitment from our employees, from our team, that I wanted to see? I was really quick to call it out when I saw that it wasn't there, or they were doing something that was like outside of the behaviors that were acceptable. And you have values, but like one of our values is no assholes, kind of counter to the Uber value. Um, it was it can be interpreted in different ways. So like, how do you make sure that that behavior is well documented before you pass the reins over to a people and culture team or an HR team or a talent team? You want to define those things, or else you can get it wrong.
Because you as a founder, you essentially are creating the scaffolding for the company, and when you can't be involved in everything, you have to let the culture build itself. It's building itself sort of in your image. So if you've created it the wrong way, it will grow and metastasize in the wrong way too.
It will do exactly what you say. Like, and that's the problem, because the things that you don't say are the things that will end up killing you.
Yeah.
In some ways. I mean, not killing you, but there'll be the things that cause you problems later. And as founders, like I don't know any founder that loves to deal with like people problems. Like, it's just like, that's bottom of the list of things that you want to do. And if you don't call that out, it can be challenging later. I mean, for us, we had this really great value that resonated with a lot of people, which was no assholes. Everyone I've talked to, everyone that I've ever worked with has worked with an asshole before. And at Certn, I can confidently say, like, we don't have them. Now, you can take that as a whole bunch of different ways. Not being an asshole doesn't mean that you don't call people in or out. It doesn't mean that you have that hard conversation. You don't have that hard conversation. Like, I use the analogy, not being an asshole means that you're kind and not always nice. Like, if I've got something in my teeth, Adam, I know you're going to be like, hey man, you got something. You're gonna send me you're gonna send me a text message and be like, hey, you got something in your teeth, and then you're gonna edit it out of this. Where, like, the nice thing to do would just be to not say anything, and then the asshole thing to do would be like, hey, you got shit in your teeth.
Yeah.
In like in a big group, and it's like people sort of kind of get that nice part mixed up without being an asshole. Like, you can say, hey, this product sucks. Like, how do we fix it? You can't just say this product sucks. And I think that's where, like, you got to define those behaviors.
Did you go through that? It sounds like you're kind of explaining a little bit, like you went through that a bit as a founder, right? I know it can be easy. So it's like, you say no assholes, but I'm sure maybe you called people out the wrong way publicly. You thought you were helping them, but it came off as like the CEO's being an asshole sort of thing. And like, did you have to moderate your behavior and kind of learn that a bit?
I would say I had to learn to be more direct. I'd say, like, in my personality assessments, like, I have a tendency to want to be liked as opposed to, having hard conversations. Yeah. So over the course of the last few years, I had to learn that I wasn't an asshole by having a hard conversation, by saying, like, this wasn't productive, or, how can we do this better? Where, I would say year one Certn me would be like, this is great. when really, like, it wasn't great. It could be great. Everything could be great, but to be able to give that feedback. So, as a founder, like, I had to document what I wanted. Like, I had to make sure that it was clear, not just to me when I passed it over, but to other people.
Yeah, I mean, we're doing that right now. I mean, I've spent a bunch of time this week actually writing a bunch of new documents for us at Levy. We're going to talk about it as a team, most likely on Monday, around these sort of topics, and like, how do we do this the right way? And some of it's easy, some of it's hard, and it's going to be a few conversations to get there and hopefully get us to the next stage. But I want to talk really briefly, because we joked about it before, but I think it's actually really critical, and we're running out of time, which is always scary. Being remote. So you're in Victoria, British Columbia. Great, beautiful place from what I've heard. I would love to go visit someday. Not necessarily a lot of like talent, the type that you need, sort of talent for Certn. You're a fully remote company and you have 400 employees. Like, why did you choose to do it that way? This was pre-COVID, of course. Like, why did you choose to do it? Why have you continued to choose to do it? Do you recommend that for other companies, especially now that people are kind of like doing hybrid, or like, I want people back in the office? How do you view that now that you did it pre-COVID, during COVID, and now we're post-COVID? What would you recommend to folks?
Short answer, it depends. It really depends on what you want and the outcomes that you're looking for and the people that you're trying to attract. So when COVID started, we had just raised our seed round. There was 24 people, all based in Victoria.
You're going to an office. You have an office. You're going to the office. Like everyone's like afternoon surf with Andrew sort of thing. Like
Well, like we had a soccer team. We had like an ultimate frisbee team. We had a dodgeball team, and like it was 100% attendance. It's like the tightest team, and I look back as like those were some of my fondest memories. Like they were hard. Like raising that seed round. I'm sure for those of you that haven't done it, and for those of you that have, like you'll recall, like that is one of the hardest times. You're trying to convince very bright people to give you money to do something that's unproven. It's hard, but like from a cultural perspective, it's like everybody's on the boat and taking that risk with you. Then the pandemic happens, and we had just raised money, and it was like, okay, the first thing with seed investors, like, okay, now you got to go find the best talent. And it's like, okay, well, we need to find the best talent in the world. And in Victoria, don't get me wrong, there are some of the best talent in the world. I mean, former CTO of GitHub, Jason Warner, lives here. One of the co-founders of Shopify lives here. Like, there's really great talent, but they didn't come here to work. They came here to retire. I mean, that's like the reality of it. I mean, not necessarily retire, but like, they're not here for a full-time job. And you can recruit people here, but in the pandemic, you can't recruit people to go anywhere. And so it's like, let's find the best people where they are. It doesn't matter it doesn't matter where in the world they are. Let's find those people. And we wanted to be global anyway. So we made the conscious decision to be remote. And that was a great decision. I mean, I love it. I can spend time. I mean, I'm in my garage. We still have the original office. It's still there. It's more like a meeting space. It's, more where people catch up. There's probably 10 people there out of 400 on a daily basis. And I wouldn't trade that. The thing that I would trade is we didn't invest in engagement. So as we talk about going from that teen kid phase to the tween phase. Your parents are your best friends until you're like 7, 8 years old.
I'm going to be sad when that day stops with my kids, because it's really.
I know, it's like it's the best. And then now it's like they're older, they want to spend time with their friends, and you could motivate the team by just doing cool shit and by being part of something cool. And now it's like we didn't invest in engagement like we should have. We did some remote work, like some remote events and things like that, but cut a lot of the engagement spending, and it hurt. Like it hurt engagement with the company. It hurt productivity.
When you say engagement spending, what do you mean? Like what was the money you were spending on engagement? Like how do you define that?
Well, I mean, when everyone was together, it was like, soccer teams and dodgeball teams and drinks and, dinners and, regular, I mean, it was like, our Christmas parties, our holiday parties were at like, Mike's house, like Mike's wife would like, there'd be like, 24 people in their families, and like everyone would be at Mike's house. And it would be, I mean, his wife is like the best host ever. It was awesome. But, I mean, you can't do that with 400 people. No. And so we kind of stopped doing that. And during COVID, it was like, you could get away with doing remote stuff because, you were only really doing two things in my mind. You were either getting pets, making babies, or working. So I guess three things. And then post that, people just crave that engagement with other people on their team. So, we didn't do that. Where I saw, peers of mine that were like, oh yeah, we're doing company offsites. We're getting everybody together. I'm like, logistically, that is hard. So we're going to
it's so time consuming too. I mean, like it's expensive, not only from a cash perspective, like flying people around the world, getting hotels, but from you're going to take up probably a week of people's work time, and the 400 people times 40 hours of work that they're not doing. I mean, that is really expensive.
super
How do you
expensive.
justify it? Like going from this place where you and I were talking when you were in San Francisco probably a year ago or something, like, hey, we're not going to do offsites, to now saying, hey, even at 400 people, we actually think this is an important investment.
It's what the team said, you know, in going around and listening. So it's a cheesy thing, but I do these like listening tours and I just go and talk to people. You know, the number one thing they say is like, I don't trust the team in like this place, or like I don't trust this group of people. I don't trust that group. And it sounds bad, but like I'm always listening for the word trust, because we are a company that was founded on trust. You know, we're a company that's trying to deliver trust. And when you hear like half our team is in the UK and Europe, and it's like, oh, I don't trust the team in the UK, or the UK says like, I don't trust the team in Victoria, and it's like, okay, well, who don't you trust? And it's like, no, well, I trust like these people, but like I don't know the rest.
There's other ones who I don't really
and
know.
It's like, yeah, like the mythical, like, you know, Victoria
other people
creature that is like is evil. And then you get them together. So we started getting people together in like, you know, department groups.
Yep.
And then all of a sudden it was like the teams within the departments that were like divided. I mean, funny enough, it's like you bring people together and then there's two people that like remotely dislike each other, you know, like maybe they don't outwardly say it, but it's like they dislike each other. And it's like you bring them together and all of a sudden they're best friends, and now they're communicating all the time because they have that same personality where they're like, you know,
that's probably why they didn't like each other in the first place, is because they were like online, you know, it's not coming across. It's like they're like too short or curt on like a Slack message. And that's just how their personality, and they took offense to it. And now they're like in person, like, oh, you're awesome.
Yeah. We like the same things. We have the same views on things. Like, you know, we align with certain core values, which is like, you know, critical. And it's like, oh, okay. And now you get these, like, now these people, like, they're best friends. They can't stop talking. And productivity in those teams is like gone way up. And so we started doing little experiments like that. And it's like, okay, let's measure the engagement and the output after these things. And it's like, okay, that was expensive, but like, what is the payback period on this? You know, like in terms of like, you know, financial payback, you can quantify by outputs. And then also just like retention. It's expensive when people leave.
It's really
and people don't leave places where they have those connections, those friends, where, you know, like they feel like if they leave, other people will leave, and, you know, they believe in the vision. So it's like getting those people together to kind of go back to pre-pandemic. We used to say like, do you have a best friend at work, was like a method of engagement. And when nobody lives next to you, nobody's close to you, you can't go have a beer with anybody, you don't have a best friend at work. Like, you might say you do, but you probably don't. You send people into a room, you know, somewhere together, and all of a sudden you've got a whole bunch of best friends.
I want to ask you more questions about how you guys do this the right way. Like, you still managed to avoid it for a long time, like better or worse. Like, you obviously still didn't do it for a long time. And I think there may be different stages where it makes sense to do it and not do it. Like, I've tried it at earlier stage companies, and it doesn't always seem to have that payback period. But maybe as you get bigger and have fewer and fewer bonds and everyone is more spread out, it becomes more valuable. But given we have like 1 minute left, and I'm sure you have things coming up next, and I do too. I want to ask you like the key question I try to ask everybody, which is, if there's one thing that you could tell an entrepreneur that leads to excellence, what is that one thing? It's like, hone this skill or do this thing, and you will have a higher chance at a better outcome. What would that be?
Communication. If you can communicate effectively, there is nothing that will stop you. You know, if you can, and that's getting people bought in, that's being transparent, it's being vulnerable. Like, when you make mistakes, talk about making those mistakes. You know, at every stage of the company, you've got to be able to communicate. And the bigger the company gets, the more effort you have to put into that communication. And it can be really challenging, but if you can hone the skill and you can make it a habit, you can make it a routine of communicating openly, honestly, and transparently, you will have a team that will go to war for you every single day, and you will build an incredible company.
Yeah, I know. It's so true. Andrew, where can folks find you if they want to reach out? How do they get in touch if they want to talk with you more or learn more about Certn?
LinkedIn. I mean, that's the best place to find me. talent lives on LinkedIn. And so Andrew McLeod, I. So look me up.
Amazing. And I will say what I love about this, every single one of these calls that I do with people, I come out, I'm like, man, I want to, if I can invest more or work more with Andrew, I'm like, I want to go do that. Like, this is seriously so awesome. Andrew, I really appreciate it. I've learned a ton today. I have so many more questions of like, man, how do I go do this? How do I make Levy as great as Certn, and continue to build the vision and the legacy we want to build? But I know we're out of time. Thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks for having me. This is awesome, and I would love to spend more time together. So you tell me when and where, and I'll be there.
I want to come to Victoria. It sounds like a beautiful place. I need to go visit.
Come on up.
So I'm going to come up with the family. We'll go do that. But thank you so much, Andrew. Really appreciate it.